The 56th annual meeting of the World Economic Forum convenes, and foremost leaders are in attendance from government, business, and civil society from the 19th to the 23rd of January 2026. Under the theme, A Spirit of Dialogue, Davos 2026 provides an impartial platform to connect leaders to confront shared challenges and drive innovations defining the future. Arise correspondents Rotus Oddiri, Rolake, Akinkugbe-Filani, and Anieze Osakwe join us live now from Davos with a preview. Good morning, the Arise team. Let's start with Rotus. Rotus, the spirit of dialogue is a theme for this year.
Good morning.
Morning. Okay, delayed. Okay, Rotus, the spirit of dialogue is a theme for this year, and it is expected that leaders will drive this dialogue. Who are some of the political leaders expected at Davos this week, particularly with Donald Trump now being projected to be the star of the show, and is coming with a large delegation: Treasury Secretary, Commerce Secretary, Special Envoy, Secretary of State. But who are the others who will be there?
Dr. Abati, you are spot on. Donald Trump is the star of Davos 2026. He's going to be, for some reason, Dr. Abati, he's going to be talking about housing affordability in the United States. Maybe it's because of the midterms later on this year, but to pick Davos, an international setting, to talk about an indigenous issue that's unique to the U.S. is quite interesting. But you are correct. He will be coming with a large delegation. Also, we're going to be expecting Ursula von der Leyen, of course, from the president of the EU Commission. There's a whole lot that's been going on with the EU with respect to dialogue. We're also going to be expecting the Vice President Kashim Shettima of Nigeria, who will be flagging off the Nigeria House today, and also talking a lot about reforms that Nigeria has undertaken and how Nigeria is supposed to be a beacon of stability for the African continent. And then Volodymyr Zelensky, he was here last year. He's going to be here again. Once again, dialogue. Many will question whether or not dialogue has helped in trying to get peace between Russia and Ukraine. A number of other leaders. Javier Milei is going to be here. Gustavo Petro of Colombia, who's had some choice words with Donald Trump, he'll be here as well. So it promises to be a packed week of political leaders. And as you like to say, a talk shop. We just hope that there'll be action behind all that talking. Excellent.
All right. Well, like you and Anieze are looking fashionably warm, in the very cold weather. But let me ask you, how does Davos 2026 feel different from previous years? And what does this theme, a spirit of dialogue, actually tell us about the state of the world right now?
Thank you very much, Aya. We're all trying to stay warm, hence the outfits. But I was last year in January 2024 when was rebuilding trust. I wasn't here last year when we had the theme collaborating in the age of intelligence. And this year, the theme of spirit of dialogue should feel less like a slogan and more like a necessity. And it's a necessity because it comes against the backdrop of the biggest fracture alliance in decades, and all of this lands squarely Davos agenda. So more than ever, the spirit of dialogue very important. And of course, you would have seen in recent days the escalation in trade tensions linked to the Greenland dispute. So as Rotus said, Donald Trump being the star of the show is very apt. Star in a different way, if you like. But the World Economic Forum this year seeks to answer 5 very important questions. And the first one is really around how do we collaborate in an age of diversion? How do we unlock new sources of growth? That's the second one. The third one is how do we better invest in people? The fourth one is how do we deploy innovation, particularly AI, at scale and responsibly. And the last, but by no means the least, and most important probably for many people on the African continent, is how do we unlock prosperity in an age of fragmentation? And it's really interesting because we have such a high-powered delegation, 65 heads of states, over 850 business leaders. And many people say a lot of that is actually down to the fact that Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, is an interim co-chair of the World Economic Forum and has managed to use his power of convergence to pulling many high-powered leaders from across the private sector. So let's hope the spirit of dialogue actually leads to real action this time round.
All right. Good to see you guys. I was just chuckling, when I heard the spirit of dialogue with Trump. You must be kidding yourself. Anyway, talk about the role Nigeria is going to play in this, Anieze, as the first time Nigeria is having its Nigerian house. I think they've constantly always done the Nigerian house anyway.
Absolutely. Thanks for that question, Rufai. So, it's important to note that Nigeria has a very sizable presence at the forum this year. It's being led by the Vice President, Kashim Shettima. We also have the Minister of Finance, Wale Edu. And finally, we also have the Minister of Trade, Jumoke Oduwole. And Nigeria's presence is essentially really solidified this year because it's the first time that, as you mentioned, the Nigeria House is here and has its own pavilion on the promenade. But if we take a step back and we kind of look at what Rolake was saying about how the theme of this year is a spirit of dialogue, a lot of people have been pointing out sort of the irony and the fact that the world seems more fragmented than ever, and it seems like a spirit of dialogue is the opposite of, everything that should be discussed at this forum. But interestingly enough, as the world deals with fragmentation and dissent, Nigeria has essentially said that it wants to emerge as an anchor for Africa. It wants to solidify its power, its economy as the strongest economy in Africa. And interestingly enough, that's exactly what we're seeing. And I think that it's something we've talked about a lot on the morning show as well. The fact that this administration always seems to be traveling to different places. We had President Tinubu just coming back from the UAE Sustainability Summit. Now we have the Vice President here in Switzerland. But it seems like the administration is making it clear that in order to make their presence known, they want to be present at different places around the world and show that engaged in dialogue. It's willing to cut deals with different countries, different business leaders as well. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. I mean, this is my first time in Davos. And yesterday we were kind of going around the promenade and, I saw the Nigeria House and it was right there next to, the America House. I saw the India House as well. Meta also has its place. And it felt very symbolic to see the Nigeria House there in the middle of Davos on the promenade. And it was a moment of pride. So it'll be really nice to see how the country is able to kind of emerge from this conference. And ultimately, I think one question that we'll all be asking, and I'll be curious to know, is how is Nigeria's presence at all of these international destinations ultimately going to translate into real results for people at home? Because it's one thing to show up, it's one thing to have your Nigeria House, but at the end of the day, how is it impacting people's lives? So that's what we'll really be looking out for this week.
Okay, Rotus. Still on the subject of who is coming, apart from the 65 heads of state, we're going to have about 100 leaders of unicorns and technologies, 1,700 leaders of businesses, and also top CEOs and chairpersons, about 850 of them. Well, who in specific terms should we expect to see? I know that our Director General of the WTO, of course, will be there, but who else, from those categories that I've identified?
Yeah, look, if you're going to talk about dialogue, Dr. Abati, you're going to have heads of international organizations. And it's interesting that you mentioned Dr. Okonjo-Iweala, Director General of the World Trade Organization, because many would argue that the WTO has been sidelined with all the trade tensions that the United States has been pushing ahead. Don't forget, I think it was just yesterday or the day before that Donald Trump said he's placing tariffs on Switzerland, Denmark, the UK, and then they've responded over this matter in Greenland. Speaking of Greenland, I think Rolake mentioned NATO. So Mark Rutte, Secretary General of NATO, he is going to be here as well. And you can expect he'll probably have some comments about this latest tariffs that Trump has put on these nations. Don't forget, there's a Supreme Court decision, though, that's supposed to be arriving sometime this week or maybe next week on whether or not those tariffs are legal. And then, of course, AJ Banga, the president of the World Bank Group, he is also going to be here as well. Let's not forget that there's still issues of fiscal structures of a number of countries, particularly from emerging markets, that need to have, their debt issues attended to. So those heads of international organizations are going to play a pretty critical role in the discussions that we'll be having this week.
All right. Okay, so thanks, Rotus. Rolake, you've outlined rising trade tensions, tariff threats, and fractures amongst, major allies. From a global economic and markets perspective, what are the key risks leaders and investors here in Davos are most concerned about right now?
Yeah, thank you very much, Aya. That's a fantastic question. And the key risk is for a lot of investors, actually speaking to people ahead of the forum, is how the fracture in global political alliances will actually translate in terms of economic impact, not just in the developed world, but in developing countries. We've seen sort of the end of the age of multilateralism from a trade perspective, and that has huge implications for capital flows and markets. I think the other thing that's really important to point out, at the opening ceremony later today, there's a concert that will feature Jean-Baptiste and Renaud Capuçon, and right after that, there's an open public forum that seeks to answer the question, what 2050 do we want? Now, many of you will know that 2050 is the primary deadline that global commitments to achieve net zero under climate agreements have been set. And that has huge implications for investment flows insofar as climate commitments are concerned. We also shouldn't forget that just a couple of weeks ago, Donald Trump pulled the US out of 65 international organizations. And that has an impact in terms of rebalancing trade and investment prospects away from the US. We're seeing a pulling down and a retrenchment of aid from the US and investment in developing countries through many multilateral financial institutions. Now, the question is, if there's going to be a spirit of dialogue with that as the backdrop, all the things I've outlined, will investors shift focus away from the Northern Hemisphere, America, and focus more on the Far East and the Global South? And how can that part of the world really harness global South-South cooperation to deliver economic development and impact, harnessing these sources of capital? And I think markets and investors will be watching very closely. And I think the final thing really is, if we have dialogue, we want to focus on outcome. Will we see a truce insofar as many of these trade tensions are concerned, geopolitical tensions, because that will ultimately influence markets at the end of the day, Ayo.
Right, thank you so much for that, Rolake. In fact, I see a lot of talking down at the Western allies. And here's a bigger picture. How has Davos this year emerged as a meeting point for countries to engage one another on a level playing field, if there's anything like that? And what role will Switzerland obviously play in this? Briefly, Anieze.
Yeah, Rufai. So to that point, it's important to note that this year's Davos has the highest level of government participation in the forum's history. So clearly, people are still interested in showing up and being present in person. I think that it's almost a marvel, the fact that this tiny country in the middle of Europe every year, year after year, is able to pull leaders from politics, from tech, from science, from the non-governmental space, from the climate space, from all of these different industries, all to this little town in the mountains. And I think that it has to do with the fact that I think when COVID happened, a lot of things went kind of digital. People weren't really meeting in person as much, but there's still that interest in coming to what seems like to be a level playing field, even though countries are somewhat separated during this conference, but they all gather in one place here in Switzerland, in Davos, and they're able to have those conversations, even if, you know, we've pointed out the fact that it's ironic that this year's about a spirit of dialogue when it seems like the world is so fractured. But the fact that people are still coming, people are still showing up, I think it points to the fact that, you know, conferences like this are so critical, especially in times like this. And moreover, we've also seen a kind of a move towards other places trying to replicate Davos, you know, Davos in the East. Absolutely. I know we have digital Davos as well. So, you know, I think that emphasis on in-person communication and in-person meetings are critical.
Good point. Well, thank you to the trio, Rolake, Rotus, and Anieze. We hope that you keep home, and we look forward to all the updates and highlights from these high-level conversations in Davos, Switzerland.